Check it out. This is my refurbished 1994 OBS Ford F350 diesel. Well, not quite yet. The truck looks like this right now, but by the end of this video, it'll be put all back together and look like what you just saw. This is part 2 of this 2-part build series, modernizing this old OBS Ford. In the first video, we removed 2 leaves out of each side of the rear leaf springs to give us a softer ride. Added a couple inches of lift, put some helper bags on so we could regain our towing and hauling capabilities, and also fabbed up some track bars to keep the traction planted to the ground and keep this rear axle from chirping back and forth. Also in the first video, we put in some work to this new engine that's going in this truck. This engine got some ARP head studs and some compound turbos. This one here is a VGT that I can manually control in the cab, so makes for a pretty fun driving experience. Now these trucks come stock with a very stiff, rough riding leaf spring set up on the front. So now I'm going to focus on getting these nice coilovers mounted up in here. And with the front of this truck supported by coil springs rather than leaf springs, it's going to give us a much nicer ride. Right now this stock suspension is made up of 3 thick leaf springs, but the design I'm going to go with is knock out these extra 2 leaf springs, and then we'll just be left with the one that actually connects the axle to the rest of the truck. And then I'll set my coil spring in there and have it pushed down to where we're getting a little bit of lift out of the front end of this truck. And also that leaf spring is not really providing a lot of suspension support, so the coil spring can do most of the support for the front end of this truck, but we still have that one leaf spring involved just to keep the axle perfectly placed where it needs to be. No need to go crazy with a whole bunch of links and hind joints and radius arms or whatever other custom design we could go with. Essentially, I'll be mimicking a very common design you see in semi-trucks when they put their front axle on air ride. They just leave one leaf spring and then an airbag there. Except in this case, instead of an airbag, it'll be a coilover supporting the front end of this truck. So now let's undo these U-bolts and take out the leaf springs we don't need anymore. Now I'm getting this stack of plates back in here. This is the maximum amount I could stack given how long the stock U-bolts are, which is pretty much I got 1 plate in there more than stock. So, but hey, that's like ½ an inch of free lift. Might as well take it. Get these all perfectly aligned. Now there's this hole in this pedestal that we have to line up with the bolt head of this bolt. So let's get this all stitched back together and tighten it all back together with the U-bolts. Okay, here's some 1/4 inch thick steel. And I have some designs carefully measured out and sharpied out, because now I'm going to work on plasma cutting these parts out, and that's going to be some of the main components for the bucket that'll hold the top of this spring and the bottom. There used to be this ear coming off this spring plate, but I cut it off, and that was the lower shock mount. This was the upper shock mount, so I removed that as well. Because then we'll make a full custom bucket to support the top of the coilover. And I also cut out this custom piece here that snakes in here around the U-bolts and everything. So we'll weld this to this plate so that then we'll have these ears jutting off that we can tie into for the coilover. It'll also get some vertical gussets to make that strong. Here are these pieces here. They're carved out in a way. And I'll go right in here and add some vertical gusset strength to this bracket we jutted out. So let's weld those in. There's that piece in there. This is nice and strong down here now. I do have the bracketry for this top bucket tacked in. Obviously, these pieces are comedically large at the moment because instead of trying to like measure with a tape measure where exactly the dimensions of this custom bracket needed to be, I just made them large so then we can get it all welded in, and then we'll go through and trim off the excess and shape these to where they're actually presentable. Also, I am continuing to use this high carbon, extra high strength steel, and even though it's thin, it's deceivingly strong, so it's going to work well for this, especially because it being thin makes it easier for me to work with since I'm cutting all this bracketry out by hand, which dang, this project has gotten me to the breaking point of needing a CNC plasma table back in my life. Back in Utah, I had some friends that had them, so I was spoiled to be able to borrow theirs when I needed to cut out the occasional bracket, but doing all this custom cutting out by hand just isn't cutting it for me. Painful to see squiggly edges for me cutting things just by hand. I've been too used to having a computer just perfectly cut out whatever custom bracket I design on the computer. So I'll get some CNC action back in my life soon because I can't really make super baller fab work without one. But anyways, let me weld this out fully. I'll even do some downhill welds here to annoy the internet welders. That's all welded inside and out. So then I'll pull this engine back out and we'll trim off all this excess and also get the backup part of this all boxed in as well, so that that open gap isn't there, and that box structure will strengthen things up even further. I did also get some thick graphite rim flex gaskets specifically made for these engines, so let's get this manifold back installed. I already did the other side. I did clean up both surfaces, and this stuff should really help keep any exhaust leaks under control and really keep this exhaust system sealed up and tight. All right, I need the excavator again to pull this engine out so we can get it in there and do some more work and get the frame painted. But this track on this side has always been very slack and given me issues. It has spit off a number of times, and that's because all this like extra metal was welded in here, and this idler was seized in its place from the previous owner trying to keep the track tight, but they just set that idler in one position and then the track stretched out more than that and can't be adjusted anymore. So the top idlers mount to these plates. However, I'm spacing them up with this 3" by 3/8 thick square tubing, and that'll take up some slack. Buy me a little bit of time, get this track behaving a little better. As you can see, here's just square tubing I hog some holes into with the plasma cutter, and then the idler mounts to that. There's some longer bolts that I got. Well, still a good bit of slack, but got new rollers in there, and those blocks will help take up some slack and buy me some time with shimmying this machine around. Here's the old roller, which was a bit blown out. Super sloppy, completely gone. All right, the neighbors just rescued this super lovable dog that I've been becoming friends with, so I'm gonna go say hi to him. Oh, Rocky loves his scratches and his cuddles, don't you, pal? Well, probably the favorite part about me is I bring him to the Sundays for Dogs. Now, Sundays for Dogs is literally so different than any other dog food I've seen. Means that it's straight up only whole ingredients and superfoods. It's literally human grade. I could eat this if I wanted to. And look at these ingredients. Nothing but absolute whole foods, superfoods. It's literally just beef, beef heart, beef liver, and then some grains and fruits and veggies beyond that. And with it just being this air-dried sort of jerky, it has great shelf life. You can store it in the pantry. You don't have to refrigerate it or freeze it like other healthy dog food options out there. Got Sundays for Dogs here, and then a standard kibble here. Hop on up here, Rocky. Let's see what he goes for. Oh, immediately for the Sundays. Which one's the one for you? Nah, straight for the Sundays. See, dogs know better anyways. It's just in their instincts to prefer the whole foods rather than a bunch of chemical stuff that they're not really designed to eat in nature. No, Rocky's used to just this generic kibble that just has a bunch of fillers, a lot of corn and wheat and soybean involved in there, and then a whole list of just chemicals that are lab grade, vitamins and minerals. And all those lab created ingredients are just there to try to mimic the core nutrients that dogs and humans need to survive. We have a lot of these in our diet, but those ingredients just aren't going to be as bioavailable and as just perfect for our bodies as the nutrients found in whole foods. So if your dog wants to experience the joy that Rocky gets to experience every time I bring him some Sundays for Dogs, then I got an awesome deal for you guys. You can get 50% off your first order of Sundays for Dogs if you use my code Goodrich. So go to sundaysfordogs.com/Goodrich and get 50% off your first order, and your dog will forever be grateful. Now that the shock tower is all trimmed down, I'm working on boxing in this backside to tie in these two walls to the rest of the frame and get this much more rigid. But since these angles are different, we end up with a big gap here and here. So I do have these two sides welded up right now. And now we need to bend this corner down and then finish this box up. So this plate here will have a soft bend line diagonally like that. So let me see if I can use this clamp to get this corner cinched down where we need it. All right, this clamp keeps wanting to slip off, but I'm almost able to get that corner cinched down. But yeah, this red plate, this red plate is so strong. It's hard to bend. Corner held down in there, at least good enough to work with a little bit for now. I think we can just get this middle section flattened out too. Maybe I'll get greedy and try to cinch it up right here too. No. All right, we'll fill in that gap. And for those of you worrying, this frame did get some paint. Rolled it on last night. Still need to go through and spray paint the cracks and mist, but now I'm going to tackle removing these old body mounts because they're getting replaced. It's a two-piece design where the bottom is sleeved into this top, so got this socket. We're going to beat them apart. At least try to. The other side went better than this. There we go. Just need to put the body bolts in. So that body bolts ended up transferring the force better. Ta-da! Just for the front of the cab. And this front one should just unthread if I'm able to keep a grip on this top part of it. Okay, every nook and cranny is painted now, so let's get the engine in for good now. I pulled the trans off because we're going to put a new flywheel and clutch and everything in there. But right now I'm also going to get this exhaust put back together. It has this junction here, and this is just loose to act like a slip joint to allow this exhaust to expand and contract. However, they work terrible because these joints are super prone to leaking because they have to be a loose enough fit to where it can actually move, but still tight enough to seal exhaust, and they don't do a good job of sealing exhaust. So I'm going to get this all in place, and I'm going to weld this joint solid, because I'm of the opinion that this whole turbo up pipe here doesn't really need to have the ability to expand and contract. And just weld it solid, and I don't think anything's going to crack or fail. So let me get this tightened up to where it wants to be, and also get the crossover pipe that takes that manifold over to this manifold to connect them, and then we'll weld this solid. Now here's this crossover. Let's get these flanges cinched up. Now I am concerned about my abilities to sneak right back into here to finish up the weld. But it looks like if I remove these two bolts, I think this bell housing adapter plate will pop off. And that'll make it so that this big old chunk of metal gets out of the way so we can get back in there better. Seems like it wants to. What's the hold up? Hey, there we go. Big long alignment dowel. But now we have much better access to that weld. All right, time to have some fun with this dirty cast metal. I cleaned it up as best I could before assembly. So here we go. Should be fun to weld. Switch to this other side. Still wasn't able to get quite back in there. There's a little gap left, so I'm going to swap to this little flux core welder. This has a much skinnier head that I should be able to sneak in there better. Got to find out the best angle. Oh yeah, we'll get it good this way. I got it. I think we'll end up with no leaks from that. Okay, I've got a new flywheel going on. And it's a brand new flywheel and clutch kit that I bought for this truck a long time ago. But apparently just sitting in the box, it interacted with some humidity. So this flywheel got a little bit of surface rust on it. But instead of messing with this machine surface, trying to clean it up at all, I think I'm just gonna run it, let it self-polish itself however it wants. And the clutch disc itself will polish off that rust. Now I'll tap this pilot bearing into the flywheel. We get this disc alignment tool slotted in here. Get this disc and pressure plate mounted up. Now this come out. Perfect. Here's a new throwout bearing, as well as a new clutch fork. I'll try to get clipped in here. There, now it's clipped on its socket. Now let's get this trans installed. There we go. Just seated into the pilot bearing, as well as all the alignment dowels. Now we can set this whole thing on the cross member here. Finally get it mounted up like it wants to. I did have this strap involved the whole time, pulling up on the oil pan. So now what does this thing need? Just a little encouragement. There. Now it's in its mounting holes. Right now, putting in the transfer case. And this transfer case was the one that originally came with this truck. So I swapped out the one that came with this transmission just because the yoke for this front drive line was different on the two transfer cases, because this one has the CV joint here. And because these transfer cases are interchangeable, it was easier to just swap transfer cases rather than messing with swapping yokes. All right, now let's get some coilovers in, which this one I split apart just because I wanted to learn how much stroke was in these shocks, and also if it had an internal bump stop, which they do. But now I'm hoping that with this jack spreading this axle down on this side, I can fit this all back together and maybe use the truck to help compress this back together to where this nut can become involved again, because right now this thing did explode when I undid it. So let's try to get this started in here, although it looks like we're going to have to spread this apart even more. Got this bigger jack in here now. We really got to spread this gap out. Let's see if that gets us closer. There we go. Let's get this bottom aligned with its two bolts. Everything's lined up, so let's see what happens when I let this jack down a little bit. All right, that got us to a pretty good spot. Actually, yeah, as you can see, this stud coming up, no threads are poking out now, but I think I can just lift this by hand. Yeah, lift this tire by hand and get enough threads sticking out to start this nut. This side should go in easier since this coilover wasn't separated. I think I have to go in through the top first, actually. So with the leaf spring jack so far down at full droop, I have no clue where we're actually going to settle at ride height. I was shooting for a few inches of lift in the front after these modifications, but I really don't know where it's going to lie. But we're about ready to take the front end of this off jack stands and get an idea of where it's going to sit with all the engine weight pushing down on it. Since, as you can see, this spring is not pushing down for the first 3 inches at least of travel here, and these have about 6 inches of travel, so it's definitely going to leave most of the weight supported by these coil springs rather than the leaf springs. And we'll just have the leaf springs there to hold the axle where it needs to be, and that's why I went with this nice simple design. So we'll see how it works out. All right, moment of truth. Go and drop it down on its tires for the first time. Well, good news is I didn't see the new coil buckets bend at all, so they seem really solid. The interesting news is I don't think this really squished the springs too much at all. So hopefully these coil springs aren't too stiff. Hopefully all that work still got us a softer ride. I guess we won't know for sure until we drive it, but I think this will end up riding pretty nice. Technically speaking, we have squished down 1 inch, and more specifically the stroke of these coilovers was 5.5 inches. So right now we sit at 1 inch of down travel and 4.5 inches of up travel, which is a nice place to be, I guess. We still have a little bit of weight to add to the truck with the cab, so that'll squish things down slightly more. And I think we'll end up at a pretty nice ride height up here and a pretty plush ride. So still some unknowns. We're still just gonna have to test drive it and see how this custom suspension turned out. Now all of these old Fords have 2 fuel tanks, and then there's a switch in the cab that controls this valve there that determines which tank you're pulling from. However, those electric selector valves are unreliable. I have personal beef with those selector valves because one failed on me one time and it left me stranded and ran out of fuel without any heads up. So I'm going to try something that I've never seen done before, but I think will work. As you can see, that back tank is higher than this front tank. So I think if I simply have a hose that connects the back tank to the front tank, then we can fill them both up, and the engine will be pulling from this tank, and as the fuel goes down, it'll drain that one into this one. And I think the only other thing we would have to modify is this vent hose here. We just need to mount higher so it's above the height of that rear tank. And then I think that should work out fine and give us our full fuel capacity of both tanks involved without some selector switch involved between the two. Now I already did the work to this rear one. As you can see, there's a barbed fitting welded to that one. So now let's work on welding another fitting to this one and then get that hose tying the two together. Now obviously welding on fuel tanks comes with some inherent risks. They can turn into bombs if you're not careful. So the process I'm using, it's a very tried and true and safe way of doing it. Here's a bottle of argon. And argon is heavier than air. So I just drain the tanks, pump argon into them, and then all the normal air floats out of the tanks and the argon just sits in there, and that displaces all the oxygen. And without oxygen, we can't have combustion and we can't have a boom. And that makes it safe to weld. Here's a stainless steel fitting I have. We'll put it right here. And to minimize the amount of burrs that accidentally go into this tank, instead of drilling a hole through here, I'm going to try to just hammer my way through this tank with a punch. Let's see how that goes. I think a small hole will be helpful instead of denting in this tank. And then maybe the punch can make it through the rest of the way. Having it punched adds a little bit of a lip, and now I can run a tap through there and have a little bit of a material to tap some threads into. Now there's some threads in there that our bung can thread on in. Mathematically, with my flow rate, I should have enough cubic footage of argon in this tank to displace all the air. So let's pull off this little hose that I had capping off that. Now argon will flow out of here, but I have a little bit more still flowing in to replace it. Well, now let's see if I can sneak in here and get a good enough weld in there to where it won't leak. don't see any areas that look to be prone to leaking, so I think that was successfully welded and I am successfully not blown up. So let's move on to the next task. I think we are ready to do the first test fire with this engine. Might as well do it with the cab off, being that these IDI engines only need one wire to run. This one right here, just gonna hot wire the injection pump solenoid. I have all the injector lines cracked right now, so we can hopefully prime fuel through the lines all the way to the injectors. Now this IDI is turning over faster than I've ever heard any IDI before. That's because I have new battery cables, fresh batteries, every connection is clean and shiny and wire brushed, and I have an aftermarket high torque starter on this. So this thing's going to be starting really easily once things are primed up. The injectors were getting some fuel to them, so I tightened them all up, and now we'll see if this thing's ready to fire off. Alrighty, almost. I'm not running a glow plug, so it probably would appreciate some glow plug action. Seems to run smooth. It's very quiet for having these two turbos on it. They really act to muffle down the noise. Ends up sounding pretty good. Look how fast this fires up. My transfer case shifter mounts to the side here and has a little arm that connects to this lever that changes what's going on in the transfer case. However, when I bought this transmission, these ears were broken off. So as you can see, here's this chunk. I've beveled the edge because I'm going to try to weld it back on, but this is cast aluminum, so it's going to be a pain to weld. The only thing I have that can weld aluminum is this cinder machine, which is a plasma cutter and welder. And this machine can do a little bit of everything, including a pulse make function that I can run the spool gun on with the spool of aluminum, and it kind of gets it done. It probably does this job the worst, but I rarely ever have to weld aluminum, so this thing only has to be strong enough for my hand to not break it when I'm shifting the lever by hand. So hopefully we can at least get it good enough for that. I think that technically got it. I think that worked out. We got two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, neutral, and then 4 low. Then I went on to finish painting the back half of the frame of this truck and then rolled it out of the shop. And then me and my friend used the excavator to position the cab back onto the frame as well as the bed. I'm going to work on getting the front end of this truck put back together so it can actually look like a truck. Okay, I'm trying out these fresh headlights that I got. And then here goes the grill. Dang, that chrome is faded. And now this truck is almost completely back together. The last piece of the puzzle is to complete our manual transmission swap for this truck, which entails adding a clutch pedal to it. That means I gotta go in there, undo this whole assembly, and then replace it with this one that has our clutch pedal integrated. And I pulled this out of a 1989 diesel F350, and this is a 1994 truck, which they have the exact same cab from the outside. However, apparently for some reason, Ford decided to change the entire structure underneath the dash, and there's some new changes with framework in there to where, literally, this big piece here won't fit in there anymore. Which means we still can't actually drive this truck until I get this assembly out of a slightly newer truck that's smaller than this. So I'm sorry we can't go drive around this truck yet, and I don't want to make a third dedicated video to this. So soon I'm going to hop back on my heavy haul toter on project, and so in the next video of that, I'll go ahead and include the footage of this truck at the end of it, completing it the rest of the way, get it all dialed, and get it driving. And then we'll be off to the races. So subscribe and stay tuned for that.